Hi, thanks for joining us today. So I'm sitting in basically a set, right? I think of it as sort of like Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood or something like that. But it's made of real stuff. This table used to be the break table here at Make Noise. People have been eating lunch off of this since long before I went on YouTube and made a sandwich. That's the original shared system behind me. And on the other side, those are books from my own collection. A bunch of people have asked recently, what's on the shelf? So I'm just going to go through a few of my favorites for anyone who's looking for some reading. One thing you'll notice is there aren't many books specifically about modular synthesis on these shelves. There are a couple of reasons for that. For one, there just actually haven't been that many books written on the topic. You'll probably recognize the classic text by Alan Strange, which I've done a few videos on in the past, and which is also soon due for a reissue, so definitely keep your eyes open for that. But otherwise, this is mostly books that have influenced or altered the way I think about music and sound in some way, often not about gear or even technique. So let's dig in. This is a book about John Cage's famous composition 433, sometimes called the Silent Piece. It contains essays and actual scores of the work. Of course, calling 433 the Silent Piece is quite a misnomer, since it's more about the fact that when we remove intentional sound, even then there are things to listen to. Cage's book of essays and stories, Silence, is his most famous written work, and in my opinion is well worth picking up for just about anybody. Notations 21 is a book of graphic scores. These explode the boundaries between score as visual instructions and score as a work of art in itself. This is a hard book to find, unfortunately. It took me several years to acquire it at a price I was willing to pay. But if you're interested in graphic scores, I also highly recommend checking out the modular and percussion piece Shed by our friend Bana Hafar. Luke Ferrari has been perhaps the most influential composer to me in the past few years. This is a book detailing his entire career. His Presque Rien works for the GRM are wonders of sculpted field recording, and his whole approach to listening and music is well worth checking out. Pierre Schaeffer founded the GRM, and here we have his Treatise on Musical Objects, which is the closest I've read to a modern work of philosophy of sound and music. It's a pretty dense read, but I think it's very relevant for anyone who's serious about their encounters with sound. Daphne Orum's An Individual Note is a pretty unusual book. It reads as an introduction to electronic music concepts for the layperson, but with various devices presented as sort of metaphors for the human body. Orum's work at the BBC is also worth tracking down. She was a pioneer, and her music is both well-researched and originary. Intermediary Spaces is a book-length interview/career overview with Eliane Radigue. Her works with tape feedback, the ARP 2500, and more recently acoustic instruments like cellos have changed the way I listen to things like harmonics. She's an utterly unique composer who's able to make infinitesimal movements of timbre into momentous waves. This is a book of poetry by Sun Ra, a musician who maintained an unusually high correspondence between art and life, as well as between his music and the words he described it with. Some of his poetry does appear on records, but I also enjoy reading a poem here and there, just to put my life into a cosmic perspective in a way that's usually pretty comforting to me. This book, Sound and Light, is a collection of essays about Lamont Young and Marian Zazila. I picked it up at their Dreamhouse installation in New York a few years ago. If you have any interest in the farthest reaches of just intonation, this is for you. Here we have several books by Curtis Rhodes. The biggest is the Computer Music Tutorial, which is almost more of a reference book than something you'd want to read cover to cover. Microsound, which you've probably heard referenced on this channel and in some of our manuals and other places before. Foundations of Computer Music, actually a book of essays edited by Rhodes. If I were to recommend only one of these books, it would be Composing Electronic Music, A New Aesthetic, which, outside of Alan Strange, is the closest thing to a technique textbook here. It's pretty ambivalent about equipment, but it covers a vast range of territory and really makes clear the mind-boggling scope of the possibilities for a composer or performer today. It's also loaded with sound examples. This book on Ornette Coleman's theory of what he called harmolodics is also a great one for me. It's mostly a group improv theory, but I think parts of it are also relevant for solo instruments when they have the level of complexity that a modular can achieve. I should note that this book does contain some potentially offensive language. And finally, this book, Audio Culture, is a big collection of essays on modern music, and I can't overstate what a game changer this was for me when I read it back in 2007 or so. It really inspired me to start removing boundaries. The boundaries between music and sound, between sound and silence, between listening and playing. If you haven't read any of the books on these shelves and you're interested in the kinds of things we talk about on this channel, then this is the book I recommend you pick up. And there has been a more recent edition of this in the last couple of years as well. I didn't cover every single book on the shelf, and this isn't my entire collection of books in this field. So I'll shuffle them around over time, and maybe someday, if people are interested, we'll do a follow-up. Happy patching, and happy reading.